The autumn wind cut through Copper Canyon like a blade seeking bone, carrying with it the scent of dying cottonwoods and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Thomas Brennan guided his weathered sorrel mare down the narrow trail that led to the settlement of Silver Creek, his saddlebags heavy with supplies and his heart heavier still with memories he could not shake. The town sprawled before him like a scar across the desert floor, wooden buildings leaning against each other for support, their paint peeling under the relentless southwestern sun. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin grey columns, and the sound of hammering echoed from the blacksmith shop where honest men earned honest wages. Thomas had come to trade his cattle for winter provisions. Nothing more, nothing less. He preferred the solitude of his ranch to the noise and judgment of civilization. As he tied his mare to the hitching post outside Murphy's General Store, a commotion near the alley caught his attention. 3 men in dusty work clothes stood in a loose circle, their voices raised in cruel laughter. Between them, something moved in the shadows behind the wooden crates that overflowed with refuse from the store. "Get on out of there, you filthy animal," one of the men called, his voice thick with disgust. "Ain't nothing in that trash worth dying for." Thomas paused, his hand resting on the leather reins. Through the gaps between the crates, he glimpsed movement swift and desperate. The men advanced closer, their boots crunching on broken glass and discarded tin cans. "Come on, boys." Another voice joined in, younger, but no less harsh. "Let's teach this savage some manners about where it belongs." The word hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had heard it before, spat from the mouths of men who believed skin color determined worth. His own father had used such words, and Thomas had sworn never to follow that poisoned path. Yet here he stood, frozen between action and the safety of indifference. A crash echoed from the alley as one of the men kicked over a wooden crate. Canned goods scattered across the hard-packed earth, rolling into the dust. From behind the remaining refuse, a figure emerged partially into the light, pressed against the brick wall of the store with nowhere left to retreat. It was a girl, perhaps 17 or 18 years old, her Apache heritage clear in the sharp angles of her face and the deep bronze of her skin. Her black hair hung in tangled strands around her shoulders, matted with dirt and debris. Her dress, once a faded blue cotton, now bore tears and stains that spoke of weeks spent hiding and surviving on scraps. Her dark eyes darted between the 3 men, calculating distances and escape routes with the desperate intelligence of the hunted. In her hands, she clutched a partially eaten apple core and a piece of stale bread, the meager treasures she had discovered in her search through the refuse. Her knuckles were scraped raw, her fingernails embedded with grime from digging through garbage for any morsel that might sustain her another day. "Look at that," the first man said, stepping closer with deliberate menace. "Eating our scraps like a dog. Your kind ain't welcome in this town, girl. We made that clear last time." She said nothing, but Thomas could see the tremor in her hands, the way her chest rose and fell with shallow, frightened breaths. Her gaze never left the men, but he caught the moment when her eyes flickered toward the main street, measuring the distance to possible safety. "Please," she whispered, the single word barely audible above the wind. "I will go. I mean no trouble." Her English was careful, precise, each word chosen with the deliberate effort of someone speaking a language learned under duress. The accent that colored her speech was soft, musical despite the fear that constricted her throat. "Too late for please," the youngest of the men said, reaching for something in his belt. "Should have thought of that before you started stealing from decent folks." Thomas felt his conscience tear like fabric under too much strain. He could walk away, enter the store, conduct his business, and ride home to the safety of his isolated ranch. No one would blame him for avoiding trouble. No one would expect a lone rancher to intervene in affairs that did not concern him directly. But the sight of the girl pressed against that wall, clutching garbage as if it were gold, struck something deep within his chest. It reminded him of the worst winter he had ever endured, when his own food stores had run low and pride had nearly cost him his life. He remembered the gnawing emptiness that made a man grateful for anything, even scraps that others discarded. "That's enough," Thomas called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The 3 men turned, surprised by the interruption. "This ain't your concern, Brennan," the first man said, recognizing Thomas despite the months since his last visit to town. "Go on about your business. Girl's not bothering anyone, Thomas replied, stepping closer to the mouth of the alley. "Seems to me she's just hungry." "She's a thief," the younger man insisted, his hand still hovering near his belt. "Stealing from good Christian folk." Thomas looked past them to where the girl remained frozen against the wall. Her eyes had shifted to him now, wide and uncomprehending. She could not understand why this stranger would speak for her, could not fathom what he might want in return. "Stealing garbage?" Thomas asked, his tone dry as desert sand. "Since when is refuse worth fighting over?" The tension in the alley stretched tight as a fiddle string. The three men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this unexpected challenge to their authority. They had expected to intimidate a lone girl, not face opposition from a respected member of the community. "You defending savages now, Brennan?" the first man asked, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "That how you want to be known in this town?" Thomas felt the weight of every eye upon him, the judgment that would follow whatever choice he made in this moment. His reputation, carefully built over years of honest dealing and hard work, balanced on the edge of a decision that could change everything. He looked again at the girl, at the apple core she still held like a lifeline, at the exhaustion etched into every line of her young face. In her eyes, he saw not the savage these men proclaimed her to be, but simply another human being reduced to the most basic struggle for survival. "I'm defending what's right," Thomas said finally, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "And what's right is letting a hungry person eat without being terrorized for it." The standoff stretched for long seconds, the only sounds the whisper of wind through the alley and the distant hammer blows from the blacksmith shop. Finally, the first man spat into the dust and turned away. "Have it your way, Brennan," he said over his shoulder. "But when that savage brings trouble to your door, don't come crying to us for help." The three men walked away, their boots heavy on the wooden sidewalk, their voices carrying muttered curses and threats that faded with distance. Thomas remained in the mouth of the alley, suddenly uncertain what to do next. The girl had not moved from her position against the wall, but her grip on the food had loosened slightly. She watched him with the wariness of a wild animal, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Her breathing had slowed, but the fear remained stark in her dark eyes. "You hurt?" Thomas asked gently, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. She shook her head once, a quick, economical movement. Her gaze darted toward the street where the men had disappeared, then back to his face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden motive. "Name's Thomas Brennan," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect his mother had taught him long ago. "I got a ranch about an hour's ride north of here. Got more food than one man can eat and a spare room that's just collecting dust." The girl's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected offer. She pressed herself more firmly against the wall, as if proximity to the brick might somehow protect her from whatever trap she suspected was being laid. "I'm not asking for anything in return," Thomas continued, reading the suspicion in her posture. "Just offering a meal and a safe place to rest if you want it." For a long moment, they regarded each other across the narrow space of the alley. Thomas could see the war being fought behind her eyes, the desperate need for food and shelter battling against hard-learned caution and the ingrained fear of white men bearing gifts. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" The simple question carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of betrayal and broken promises. Thomas found himself without easy answers, only the certainty that walking away would haunt him for the rest of his days. "Because," he said slowly, "everybody deserves to eat something better than garbage." She studied his face for signs of mockery or cruelty, but found neither. What she saw instead was something she had almost forgotten, existed in the world outside her own people. Simple human decency, offered without conditions or expectations. The apple core slipped from her fingers and rolled across the dusty ground. She straightened slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone testing the strength of ice beneath their feet. "I am called Ayanna," she said, the name falling from her lips like a prayer offered to an uncertain god. Thomas nodded, committing the name to memory. "Pleasure to meet you, Ayanna. You ready to get out of this alley?" She hesitated for one more heartbeat, then stepped forward into the pale afternoon sunlight that slanted between the buildings. As she moved, Thomas caught sight of the full extent of her condition, the hollows beneath her cheekbones that spoke of prolonged hunger, the way her dress hung loose on her thin frame, The careful way she moved, as if any sudden motion might shatter the fragile hope this moment represented. Together, they walked toward the main street, an unlikely pair that drew stares and whispered comments from the few people abroad at this hour. Thomas felt the weight of their judgment but chose to bear it. Behind him, Ayanna moved like a shadow, close enough to follow, but ready to vanish at the first sign of danger. At the general store, Thomas conducted his business with efficient speed, purchasing supplies for the coming winter and adding extra provisions he had not planned to buy. Flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and other staples that would stretch his stores through the cold months ahead. The storekeeper, Murphy, watched with knowing eyes but asked no questions. As they loaded the supplies onto Thomas's packhorse, Ayanna remained silent, her gaze constantly moving to catalogue every exit and potential threat. She had accepted his offer of help, but trust was a luxury she could not yet afford. The ride to Thomas's ranch passed in companionable silence, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves providing a peaceful counterpoint to the vastness of the desert landscape that surrounded them. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the modest buildings of the Brennan Ranch came into view. The main house was a simple structure of adobe and timber, built to withstand the harsh extremes of desert weather. A wide porch wrapped around the front and sides, offering shade during the brutal summer months and protection from winter winds. Behind the house stood a barn, a corral, and various outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch maintained by careful hands. Thomas dismounted and began unloading the supplies, his movements economical and practiced. Ayanna remained on her borrowed horse, taking in every detail of her surroundings with the sharp attention of someone accustomed to evaluating safe havens. "Come on inside," Thomas said, shouldering a sack of flour. "I'll get some supper started and show you where you can clean up if you've a mind to." The interior of the house reflected its owner's practical nature. Sturdy furniture built for comfort rather than show, shelves lined with well-worn books, and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Everything was clean and orderly, but there was a loneliness to the space that spoke of long evenings spent in solitary contemplation. Thomas set about preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, his movements sure and practiced. Ayanna stood near the door, ready to flee if necessary, watching his every motion with the intensity of someone who had learned that survival often depended on reading the smallest signs of changing intent. The smell of cooking food filled the small kitchen, rich and nourishing, after the long months of scraps and hunger. Thomas noticed how her eyes followed every spoonful, how she swallowed reflexively at the aroma of proper sustenance. "Should be ready soon," he said, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. "There's a wash basin and clean towels in the back room if you want to freshen up." She nodded once and disappeared through the indicated doorway, moving with the silent grace of someone accustomed to making themselves invisible. Thomas heard the quiet splash of water and continued his preparations, adding extra portions to accommodate his unexpected guest. When Ayanna returned, she had washed the grime from her face and hands and made an attempt to comb the tangles from her hair with her fingers. The transformation was subtle, but significant, revealing the natural beauty that hunger and hardship had obscured. Her dark eyes held a clarity that spoke of intelligence and strength, qualities that had enabled her survival in circumstances that would have broken lesser spirits. Thomas served the meal on plain ceramic plates, setting hers before her with the same courtesy he would have shown any honored guest. She stared at the food for a long moment, as if unable to believe its reality, then began to eat with careful, measured bites. Not the desperate gulping of the starving, but the deliberate consumption of someone who had learned to make every morsel count. They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the clink of cutlery and the whisper of wind around the eaves of the house. Outside, the desert settled into its evening stillness, coyotes beginning their distant chorus as darkness claimed the vast expanse of sand and stone. When the meal was finished, Thomas cleared the dishes and set about banking the fire for the night. Ayanna watched his domestic routine with something approaching wonder, as if the simple act of maintaining a home was a foreign concept. "There's a spare room at the end of the hall," Thomas said when his evening tasks were complete. "Clean sheets on the bed and a blanket that should keep you warm enough. Door's got a good lock if that makes you feel safer." She looked at him with those dark, searching eyes, still trying to understand the motivations behind his kindness. In her experience, white men who helped Apache women always expected payment of one kind or another. Yet she sensed no such expectation from this weathered rancher. "Thank you," she said softly, the words carrying more weight than simple gratitude. They encompassed appreciation for the meal, the shelter, and most importantly, the respect he had shown her as a human being worthy of basic dignity. Thomas nodded and retired to his own room, leaving her to explore the small guest chamber he had offered. The room was Spartan but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a wooden chair, and a small table that held a kerosene lamp and a few books. Most importantly, it had a door that closed and a window that offered both light and, if necessary, escape. That night, as Thomas lay in his own bed listening to the familiar sounds of his ranch settling into sleep, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. He had acted on impulse, driven by conscience rather than careful consideration of consequences. Now he faced the reality of having given shelter to a young Apache woman in a territory where such actions could bring swift and violent retribution. Yet as he recalled the moment when she had spoken her name, the tentative trust in her voice, he felt no regret. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he had done what his heart demanded, and that knowledge brought a peace he had not experienced in far too long. In the guest room, Ayanna lay fully clothed atop the quilt, her body tense despite the comfort of the bed. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of running, of hunger, of hands both cruel and gentle. But for the first time in many months, she slept without the gnawing emptiness in her belly, and that small mercy was enough to kindle a fragile hope that perhaps, in this harsh and unforgiving world, there might still exist pockets of unexpected grace. Dawn broke over the Brennan Ranch with soft golden light that transformed the harsh desert into beauty. Thomas found Ayanna sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise with focused attention, her dark hair catching the light like polished obsidian. "Morning," Thomas said softly, settling beside her but maintaining respectful distance. "Good morning, Thomas Brennan," she replied with careful formality. "Just Thomas," he said. "No need for formality here." A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen. It transformed her face completely, revealing the young woman she might have been before hunger and fear carved their marks. They sat in comfortable silence as the desert awakened. A roadrunner darted between sage bushes, and somewhere distant, a hawk circled on warming air currents. "I should go," Ayanna said suddenly. "You have been kind, but my presence brings danger to your home." Thomas had expected this conversation. What kind of danger? Men like those yesterday do not forget. They will return with more men, with guns. They will say, "I stole from you, that I threatened you." The casual way she spoke of her likely death told Thomas more about her recent experiences than any explanation could. She had learned to accept violence as inevitable. "And if you leave, where will you go?" Uncertainty flickered across her features. South, perhaps. To Mexico, or west, to the mountains where some bands still roam free. "Winter's coming. You got supplies for a journey like that?" Her silence was answer enough. They both knew she would attempt such a journey with nothing more than her tattered dress and whatever scraps she could forage. "Stay," Thomas said simply. "At least until spring. Help me work the ranch through winter, and come spring, if you still want to leave, I'll outfit you properly." She searched his expression for hidden motives. "You would trust me? An Apache woman alone in your home? I trusted you last night. Woke up with my throat uncut and my valuables where I left them." The mild joke drew another smile, but it faded quickly. "There are things you should know about me," she said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Why those men hate me so much." Thomas waited as she gathered strength. "My band was peaceful. We traded with settlers, learned their ways. Last spring, a settler's daughter went missing. When they found her body by the river, they said it was Apache work." Thomas felt his stomach clench as he understood her story's trajectory. "The soldiers came with the girl's father and many others. They demanded we give up the killers. When my father said we knew nothing, they said we were all guilty. They killed my father first, then turned guns on anyone who ran. My mother, my younger brother, the elders. They burned our lodges with the wounded inside. The desert morning felt cold, despite the warming sun. I hid in the rocks, watched it all. When they left, I found no survivors. But 3 days later, I learned the truth. The girl's own father had killed her in drunken rage, then placed her body by the river. His wife finally told the truth, but by then it was too late. Jesus, Thomas breathed. When word spread that the massacre was based on lies, some felt shame, others chose anger. They say I am witness to their guilt, proof that innocent blood was spilled for nothing. Thomas understood now why she expected violence wherever she went. The father who killed his child left town the day his wife spoke truth. The same people who massacred my family helped him escape. Thomas rose and walked to the porch railing, the peaceful landscape shadowed by knowledge of hidden horrors. I want you to stay, he said finally, not out of pity, but because it's right. Because maybe together we can prove that not all white men are like those who destroyed your family. And when they come with guns and accusations, then we'll face that together. Over the following days, routine established itself. Ayanna proved skilled with horses and cattle, approaching each task with focused intensity. Her presence transformed the lonely ranch into something approaching a home, but tension simmered beneath domestic tranquility. Riders passed more frequently, and Ayanna always positioned herself near exits, ready to vanish at first sign of danger. 2 weeks after her arrival, the storm broke. Thomas was repairing harness in the barn when he heard approaching horses. Not casual clip-clop, but deliberate rhythm of multiple horses in formation. 6 men rode up, rifles visible in saddle scabbards. Deputy Marshal Harrison led them, followed by the 3 men from Silver Creek and 3 others. Their faces bore grim determination of men convinced of their righteousness. Thomas stepped into the yard, rifle ready. A curtain twitched in the kitchen window. "Morning, Marshal," Thomas called. "Brennan, we need to talk about the Apache woman you've been harboring. She's wanted for questioning about horse theft and other crimes." "What crimes exactly?" "Jenkins lost 3 horses last week. Found Apache tracks around his corral." "Tracks can be made by anyone. Doesn't prove anything." "She's also an escaped prisoner," Harrison added. "Fugitive from justice." The lies came smoothly, delivered with official authority. "I'd like to see the warrants," Thomas said. "This is frontier, not some eastern courthouse. Sometimes justice moves faster than paperwork, and sometimes justice gets confused with revenge." The 6 men shifted in saddles, hands moving toward weapons. "We're taking her in," Harrison declared. "You can hand her over peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." Thomas read the mixture of determination, hatred, and anticipation in their faces. These men hadn't come to arrest a fugitive. They'd come to finish what they started when they destroyed Ayanna's village. "She's under my protection," Thomas said, raising his rifle. "You want her? You'll have to go through me." Silence followed, broken only by wind through sagebrush. 6 against 1, odds calculated by all parties. "Don't be a fool, Brennan. She's just an Indian, not worth dying for." "Maybe not to you, but I gave my word." The kitchen door opened. Ayanna emerged wearing a ceremonial dress Thomas had never seen, her hair braided with beads and feathers. She carried herself with dignity that transformed her from refugee to queen. "I am here," she called. "If it is me you want, there is no need for violence." "Ayanna, no. Get back inside." She ignored him, walking until she stood beside him. "I will come with you, but I ask that this man be left in peace. He has done nothing wrong." "You're confessing to the charges?" "I am confessing to being Apache. If that is a crime in your law, then I am guilty." Her simple dignity struck the men like a physical blow, creating momentary uncertainty. "Mount up," the marshal ordered. "We'll sort this out in town." Thomas stepped between Ayanna and the mounted men. "I told you, she's under my protection." The standoff stretched taut. Then salvation arrived from an unexpected quarter. Thunder of many horses reached them. From the east, dust rose, and beneath it, sunlight glinted on metal. A U.S. cavalry patrol approached, blue uniforms and guidon visible. The vigilantes found themselves outnumbered by professional soldiers. Marshal Harrison's confident authority shifted to barely concealed frustration. Young Lieutenant Morrison led 20 soldiers, reining in at the property's edge. His eyes assessed the tactical situation with trained military mind. "What's the situation here?" Harrison forced a smile. "Lieutenant Morrison, We're conducting official business, arresting a fugitive Apache woman. Morrison's gaze moved between Marshal Thomas and Ayanna. Something triggered his suspicions. I'll need to see your warrants and documentation. All arrests of Native Americans require federal oversight under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Thomas felt hope surge. The young officer was either committed to proper procedure or suspicious enough to demand proof. This is a local matter. Federal intervention isn't required. That's not your decision, Marshal. I'll need to see your papers. Heavy silence followed. Harrison calculated consequences of proceeding without authority against frustration of being denied his prey. Finally, the marshal spat and jerked his horse's reins. This isn't over, Brennan. We'll be back with proper papers. The 6 riders wheeled away, leaving dust and threats. Thomas watched them go, knowing Harrison's words guaranteed future trouble. Lieutenant Morrison dismounted and approached. I need to hear your side of this situation. Thomas looked at Ayanna, seeing in her eyes the same question. Could they trust this young soldier with the truth? Standing in his yard with desert wind carrying scents of sage and possibility, Thomas realized his lonely days were over forever. Whether that change would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. He would face whatever came next with Ayanna beside him. That evening, after giving their statements to Lieutenant Morrison and watching the cavalry patrol ride toward the territorial capital with promises to investigate the situation, Thomas and Ayanna sat together on the porch as stars emerged in the vast desert sky. You could have died today, she said quietly. So could you. But you chose to stand with me. Why? Thomas considered the question, searching for words adequate to explain the transformation that had taken place in his heart over these past weeks. Because, he said finally, sometimes a man finds something worth protecting, and that changes everything about who he is. Ayanna turned to face him fully, moonlight silvering her features. And what have you found worth protecting? Instead of answering with words, Thomas reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers as naturally as rivers joining to form something larger than either could be alone. In that simple gesture, beneath the infinite canopy of desert stars, 2 souls who had been marked by loss and loneliness discovered that love could indeed bloom in the harshest of landscapes, nourished not by easy circumstance but by the deeper waters of courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to stand together against whatever storms might come. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges that would test them both. But for now, in this moment of peace, stolen from a world too often consumed by hatred and fear, they had found something precious enough to fight for, something strong enough to justify any risk. Together they would face whatever tomorrow might bring, bound not by law or convention, but by the rarer and more enduring ties of hearts that had chosen to beat as one.